state examiner's fingers traced the spines of 3 thick binders on my desk as Director Kensington's polished shoes shifted nervously behind me. The fluorescent lights of Evergreen Haven's administrative office hummed overhead, making my temples thump. I watched her select the blue binder marked with last December's date, the one with the most entries, and open it to a random page. Her eyebrows rose as she scanned my neat, time-stamped handwriting. Floor 3, room 12. Read aloud. 10:37 p.m. Failure to check resident vital signs as required by Policy 24. Kensington's breath hitched. And here, the examiner continued, flipping several pages forward. January 3rd, 1:15 a.m. Left unattended beside bed with call light out of reach. Resident, Arthur Milford. The binder slipped from her fingers, pages fluttering like trapped birds to the polished linoleum floor as Director Kensington stared at me, his face the color of spoiled milk. I'm Alina Rivers. For 3 years, I've walked the quiet halls of Evergreen Haven from 10 p.m. until 6 a.m., checking on residents whose families think they are safe. The smell of antiseptic and old perfume still clings to my uniform even after washing it. Last winter, something changed when Director Kensington took over from the family who built this place. Those green tiles in the hallway, they used to be scrubbed until they gleamed. Now they are sticky under my sneakers, even after the day shift supposedly mopped. My clipboard started as a simple way to remember which residents needed their medication at specific times. But then I noticed patterns. Night shift staff assigned to more than 20 residents simultaneously. Call lights left unanswered for 40 minutes or more. Bed sores forming on patients who were supposed to be repositioned every 2 hours. Each violation had a policy number attached, though I doubt most night shift workers even read the employee handbook anymore. When I first brought my concerns to Kensington last October, his office smelled of lemon polish and indifference. He leaned back in his leather chair, gold pen tapping against his notepad. "Alina," he said, "our budget report looks better when we don't have documentation of problems. Maybe focus on the positive aspects of care." His polished shoes didn't scuff even as he shifted his weight uncomfortably. That's when I started documenting everything. Not just the neglect, but the exact times, dates, and policy numbers. Every Tuesday at 2:17 a.m., resident Arthur Milford's call light would go unanswered because his aide was helping someone with wealthier family members. Every Friday night at 11:45 p.m., the medication cart would be left unattended in the dining room while staff took unauthorized breaks. This winter's icy roads made hallway treacherous, yet wheelchairs sat with loose wheels, and floors remained wet after cleaning without warning signs posted. My fingers cramped from writing so much some nights, but the chill of knowing what could happen if I stopped kept me going. Last night, I documented 7 violations before midnight alone, the fluorescent lights buzzing like angry bees above my head. The cold draft from the broken window in the activities room made my fingers ache as I wrote, but I kept going. When I finally finished my rounds at 5:45 a.m., I found Mr. Henderson's wheelchair parked 3 feet from the edge of his room with no call light within reach. My pen moved across the paper almost by itself. December 14, 5:42 a.m. Failure to position wheelchair at safe distance from bed. Resident, Robert Henderson. Policy 7.3. The next morning, the front page of the Clearwood Chronicle featured a story about a preventable fall at another nursing home in the county. Director Kensington's name wasn't mentioned, but his gold pen would be clicking nervously when I handed him this documentation. That morning, I slid the documentation for Mr. Henderson under the break room door where Director Kensington had his office. His name plaque read in shiny gold letters, Robert Kensington, Executive Director. I didn't knock. The violation stood on its own. Failure to position wheelchair at safe distance from bed. It was December 14th, and the winter sun barely made it through the frosted windows of Evergreen Haven, casting long shadows down the hallway. By 7 a.m., I was back on duty. The morning shift staff moved through the ward like ghosts in their pastel scrubs. I checked Mr. Henderson first. His bed sheets were tangled around his legs, his call light blinking insistently on the nightstand. "Forgot my pills," he mumbled, his eyes unfocused. He was supposed to receive his blood pressure medication at 5 a.m., not 7 a.m. as he'd gotten today. The confusion set in quickly. He kept asking what day it was, his hands trembling as he tried to straighten the blanket. I pulled out my clipboard. Medication administration log, Robert Henderson. Scheduled time, 0500, Administered, 0700. Signature, Maria, initials only. I'd filed an incident report with the charge nurse, Janice, at 7:15 a.m. It happens, Alina, she'd said without looking up from her coffee. He's always confused in the morning. The pharmacy invoice showed the medication cost $187.50 per month. I circled the discrepancy in red ink. Back at the station, I found Mrs. Gable's chart. Her skin was parchment thin, and the left heel had developed a pressure ulcer the size of a dime. Turn schedule was written in bold letters in her care plan every 2 hours. Her room smelled of antiseptic and old lady perfume. When I came to help her at 10:30 a.m., she'd been lying in the same position for nearly 4 hours according to the position log sheet I checked. I need to turn you, Mrs. G, I said, lifting her carefully. She groaned as I shifted her weight. Her heel wept a clear fluid that stained the white pillowcase. I called the wound care nurse at 11:05 a.m. The phone rang 6 times before going to voicemail. I left a detailed message and marked it on the incident report with time and date. When I checked back at 2 p.m., the call hadn't been returned. In the supply closet, I found the pressure-relieving cushions I'd ordered 3 weeks ago sitting in unopened boxes. The reorder form was stamped, "Denied budget constraints," in Director Kensington's neat handwriting. By 4 p.m., I was documenting food poisoning cases in 3 residents on the East Wing. Their breakfast had included scrambled eggs that had a greenish tint and smelled faintly of sulfur when I entered the dining room. Mrs. Peterson had pushed hers around her plate instead of eating it. By noon, she was vomiting into a basin, her face pale against the blue hospital blanket. The kitchen staff argued loudly behind the swinging doors about who was responsible for breakfast that morning. Frank was supposed to check the eggs, one voice said. The cooler was acting up last night. Another replied. The temperature log for the walk-in cooler showed the internal temperature had been at 48 degrees for 12 hours straight, 2 degrees above the safety limit. The health department requires food to be stored at 41 degrees or below. I spoke to the dietary supervisor, Carl, at 2:30 p.m. He wiped grease from his apron pocket and promised to look into it. By dinner time, the same eggs were being served to the residents in the West Wing. I noted the date on the invoice, December 14th, and circled the supplier's name, Hudson Valley Meats and Produce. Their delivery truck had been idling in the parking lot all morning, the exhaust creating a haze in the cold air. At 8 p.m., I found Mr. Davis standing in the medication room. His fingers were tracing the labels on the shelf, his eyes wide. The door was propped open with a mop bucket, the lock broken since November 12th according to my maintenance request log. "Just looking for something," he said when he saw me. His hands trembled as he clutched the empty pill bottle he'd picked up. I escorted him back to his room and documented the incident immediately. 2,230 hours. Medication room door unsecured. Resident James Davis entered medication unsupervised. The pill bottle was a common vitamin supplement, but it could have been anything. I'd filed maintenance requests for the lock 6 times, each marked urgent in my documentation. The maintenance supervisor had promised to get to it eventually during our November 30th conversation while eating a donut in his office. At midnight, I did my final rounds. The floor near the east elevator was wet, not just damp, actually wet. A puddle the size of a dinner plate reflected the fluorescent lights above. I stepped around it carefully, my sneakers making squishing sounds. No warning sign was posted. The cleaning cart sat 3 feet away, the mop bucket still containing dirty water from hours ago. I documented the hazard. 0030 hours, wet floor without warning sign. Location, east elevator corridor. This made the 3rd time I'd reported this specific issue. The first time was December 1st, the second December 8th. Both times, Director Kensington had promised immediate action when I showed him my documentation. At 2:15 a.m., I heard the crash. Mrs. Peterson's call light was blinking frantically when I reached her room. She was on the floor near the elevator, her leg twisted at an unnatural angle. A puddle of water spread around her head, mingling with the gray hairs on her temples. Her eyes were closed, her breathing shallow. The wet floor sign I'd seen at midnight was now propped against a wall 3 rooms down. She slipped and fell. A night aide said, not looking at me. "Happens sometimes." Mrs. Peterson's medication was scattered across the floor, the pills that should have been given with breakfast, the ones she hadn't received because of the food poisoning that had kept her in bed all day. I knelt beside her, my clipboard in one hand, my other checking for a pulse. Her skin was cold against my fingers. The incident form was already half filled in my head, details clicking into place like puzzle pieces. The date, December 15th. The time, 0215 hours. The cause, preventable fall due to unaddressed wet floor hazard. 3 prior documented warnings. Mrs. Peterson's medical record showed she'd had hip replacement surgery last year. A fall could be catastrophic for her. The ambulance arrived 20 minutes later, its lights cutting through the dim hallways. As they loaded her onto the stretcher, I caught Director Kensington's eye. He stood near the nursing station, his gold pen clicking nervously in his pocket. He looked at me, then at Mrs. Peterson, then back at me. His smile was tight. "Tragic accident," he said, but I could see the sweat beading on his upper lip. When they left, I returned to the break room. My clipboard was heavy with documentation pages filled with timestamps, names, specific details that couldn't be argued away. I flipped to the section about the wet floor hazard. The first entry was dated December 1st. I'd written in the margin, "Spoke with Director Kensington, promised immediate action." The second was December 8th. Followed up, Director Kensington acknowledged issue, stated corrected. The third was December 14th, midnight. "Floor still wet, no warning sign. Hazard persists." I pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and began writing. The clock on the wall showed 3:45 a.m. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a blue glow on the papers in front of me. Outside, the winter wind howled against the windows of Evergreen Haven, but inside the silence was broken only by the scratching of my pen against the paper. I spread the documentation across the break room table, my pen moving systematically through each incident report, timestamp, and observation. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered slightly, casting long shadows on the pages. My fingers traced the dates November 15th, when Mr. Henderson went without his evening medication because the nurse assigned to his wing was diverted to help with a supposed emergency that never appeared in the log. November 22nd, when Mrs. Davison fell because the call button by her bed hadn't been tested in weeks, as shown by the maintenance records I'd cross-referenced. Each entry connected to another, forming a chain of neglect that stretched back months. My clipboard, usually a tool of organization, felt like evidence now, heavy with proof of what had happened. I reached for the shift schedule binder, its edges worn from constant use. The pages crackled under my fingers as I turned back through the weeks. That's when I saw it. The pattern wasn't just in the neglect of residents, but in the falsification of records. 3 night shift nurses listed as working on December 3rd, but I knew only 2 had been scheduled. The same codes used to document additional staff codes I remembered seeing in old files from when the facility was still family-run. The pen stopped moving. Outside the window, snow began to fall, large, silent flakes accumulating on the already dusted landscape. Inside the break room, my breath made small clouds in the cold air that seeped through the door. I flipped back further, month after month, confirming what I now knew. Kensington wasn't just cutting corners on care. He was lying about having the staff to provide it. My own documentation wasn't just about policy violations anymore. It was about uncovering a system built on deception. I spread my time-stamped notes across the small break room table, the fluorescent lights above casting a sterile glow on the pages. My pen, the same one I'd used for months, felt heavier in my hand now. The schedule binder lay open before me, pages worn and creased from constant flipping. December 3rd listed 3 night shift nurses, Miller, Chen, and myself. But I knew the truth. Miller had called in sick with the flu that night, leaving Chen and me to cover 12 residents between us. The falsified attendance sheet showed all 3 names checked in, along with a handwritten notation about overtime coverage that had never been approved. I circled both entries in red, the pen scratching against the paper. Outside, the snow continued to fall, muffling the sounds of the facility. Inside, the only sounds were my breathing and the rustle of paper as I worked. For 3 days, I stayed after my shift, working through the binders page by page. I cross-referenced every entry with my own notes, checking timestamps, signatures, and documentation codes. The pattern became clearer with each page. Staff shortages were consistently masked with falsified records. December 10th showed 2 CNAs on duty when only 1 had been scheduled. December 17th listed 3 nurses when only 2 had been present. The binder contained a hidden language of deception, special codes indicating supplemental staff that weren't real people but phantom employees whose existence existed only on paper. My own documentation, once just a record of policy violations, had transformed into a timeline of deliberate understaffing. I numbered each discrepancy, creating a chain of evidence that led directly to Kensington's office. On the fourth night, I made photocopies of everything. The copy machine whirred and clunked in the hallway outside the break room, its rhythmic sounds echoing in the empty corridor late at night. I fed in my timestamp notes, page by page, then the falsified schedule entries, then the maintenance records I'd collected. The machine's warm light illuminated each page as it reproduced the evidence. I organized the copies chronologically, clipping them together with metal binder clips. The originals I placed back in my clipboard, which now felt like a briefcase full of secrets. Each click of the binder clip echoed in the silence of the night shift hallway. Packaging the evidence required careful planning. I didn't want to leave a trail back to me. I bought a plain manila envelope at the 24-hour mart on the edge of town, paying cash. No cameras at that location, just the tired-looking clerk behind the counter who barely looked up as I handed over the $5 bill. At home, I printed a label with the state health department's address, using the public library computer to avoid any trace on my personal printer. I folded the copies carefully, placing them in the envelope without a note or letter, just the evidence, speaking for itself. The next morning, before my shift started, I drove to the post office on the other side of Willowbrook. The snow had stopped overnight, leaving a fresh white blanket over everything. I dropped the envelope into the blue collection box at the far end of the parking lot, where the security camera couldn't see me. The metal clank of the door closing sounded final. 2 weeks passed without response. My clipboard remained my constant companion, but now it carried a different purpose. Each policy violation I documented felt like another piece in a puzzle that was slowly taking shape. Kensington continued his routine, neatly pressed shirts, gold pen tapping against his palm during morning meetings, polished shoes squeaking on the linoleum floors. Nothing changed on the surface, but beneath, something had shifted. I felt it in the way some of the newer staff looked at me, in the way certain residents seemed to understand I was paying closer attention than before. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, I received a call on my personal phone, the one I kept only for family and emergencies. The caller ID showed unknown number, but the voice on the other end belonged to a state investigator from the Department of Health and Human Services. "MS, Rivers?" the woman asked, her tone professional but not unfriendly. "We've received some information regarding Evergreen Haven. Would you be available to meet with us tomorrow at your convenience?" My heart didn't race the way I expected it to. Instead, a calm settled over me. I arranged to meet them at a diner on the outskirts of town, away from anyone who might recognize me. That evening, I printed another set of my documentation, using the library computer again. The diner smelled of coffee and fried food, the clatter of dishes and murmur of conversations providing just enough background noise to shield our conversation. The investigators, a man in his late 50s with kind eyes and a younger woman with sharp, focused attention, listened as I laid out my evidence methodically. No emotion, just facts, timestamps, dates, names, discrepancies. They asked precise questions, taking notes as I spoke. "Can you testify to these observations?" the younger investigator asked, her pen poised over her notepad. "I can," I said simply. "Everything in these documents is based on first-hand observation. I have maintained my notes contemporaneously, meaning I recorded events as they happened, not afterward." The man nodded. "We'll proceed with an unannounced inspection. Probably Thursday evening. Would you be available then?" "I work the night shift," I said. "I'll be there." Thursday came with a bitter wind that cut through my jacket as I parked in the Evergreen Haven employee lot. Snow had fallen again overnight, and the plows had left dirty mounds at the edges of the parking spaces. I carried my clipboard inside like always, though now it held no notes for that night, just pens and the usual assessment forms. At 9:00 p.m., as I was checking on Mrs. Gable in room 204, the main entrance alarm buzzed. I peeked out of the residence room and saw 2 people in official-looking jackets speaking with the front desk clerk. Then I saw them, investigators. My clipboard felt like a shield. They worked methodically, beginning with resident care rooms. I saw them checking medication carts, examining call light logs, and talking to residents. At 11:30 p.m., they asked to see the staffing schedule binder. Kensington, who had been hovering nervously nearby, retrieved it with slightly trembling hands. The investigators compared the binder with actual staff present. I could see the younger woman's brow furrowing as she turned page after page. Around midnight, they asked to see the director's office. Kensington led them down the hall, his polished shoes squeaking with each step. I continued my rounds, but my ears were tuned to any sounds from the office direction. 20 minutes later, I heard raised voices, Kensington's defensive, the investigator's firm. I passed the office door and saw the younger investigator holding up a page from the schedule binder, pointing something out to her partner. By 2:00 a.m., the investigators had completed their preliminary examination. They spoke privately with several staff members, including me. They asked specific questions about staffing levels, resident care, and emergency procedures. When they left, the facility was silent again, but everything had changed. The clipboard in my hand didn't feel heavy with evidence anymore. It felt like a tool for something new. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew the truth was finally out there, documented in the careful notes I had taken over months of quiet observation. Snow was falling again outside, large flakes swirling in the beam of the security lights as I walked to my car, ready to face whatever came next with the same methodical care I had brought to documenting the truth. The clipboard in my hand didn't feel heavy with evidence anymore. It felt like a tool for something new. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew the truth was finally out there, documented in the careful notes I had taken over months of quiet observation. Snow was falling again outside, large flakes swirling in the beam of the security lights as I walked to my car, ready to face whatever came next with the same methodical care I had brought to documenting the truth. 2 days later, I was called back to Evergreen Haven for a meeting with the state examiners and their supervisor. The woman I'd seen paging through my records, Ms. Doyle, introduced me to Director Roberts from the Regional Health Authority. They had copies of everything I'd provided, organized chronologically with color-coded tabs for each violation category. I recognized my handwriting instantly, the dates and times I had recorded when the hallway light flickered for 3 nights before someone finally fixed it, the specific notation of how often Mrs. Chen was left waiting for her medication. "This is the most detailed documentation we've ever received from a facility employee," Ms. Doyle said, her fingers tracing the entries about understaffing on overnight shifts. "Your system created a timeline that's impossible to dispute." Director Roberts nodded. "Thank you for your thoroughness, Ms. Rivers. We've reviewed the evidence and found multiple violations that warrant immediate intervention. As of this morning, Mr. Kensington no longer has any affiliation with Evergreen Haven." I watched Director Roberts hold up a photograph of Kensington being escorted from the building by security officers, his arms crossed as he protested through his attorney. His polished shoes were scuffed on the pavement outside where he'd worked for 6 years. "Would you be willing to consult with us during the transition period?" Director Roberts asked. "Your records show exactly where the system breaks down. We need someone who understands the daily realities." I agreed, beginning my consulting role the following week. The changes happened gradually at first. New schedules posted with actual staff numbers rather than ideal numbers, additional caregivers hired to cover overnight shifts properly, medication carts stocked consistently instead of running empty by 3:00 a.m. But the improvements became impossible to ignore when Mrs. December stopped bruising from improper transfers. When Mr. November stopped developing pressure sores because someone actually turned him every 2 hours. When the facility stopped smelling like neglect and started smelling like proper cleaning supplies and the fresh flowers that appeared in the common area. One afternoon, as I updated the consultant notes I was keeping separate from my work records, Director Roberts stopped by my temporary office. "Your documentation method created undeniable evidence," she said, gesturing toward my binder. "Can you train our new compliance officer on your system?" I smiled, thinking about all those times I sat alone at the nursing station, writing down every missed check, every delay, every policy violation while the Northeast winter raged outside. "It's not complicated," I said, flipping to a clean page in my notebook. "You just have to write down what happens, exactly when it happens, exactly how it happens. No emotions, no interpretations, just facts." The room smelled of coffee and fresh paint now, not disinfectant and neglect. Outside, snow was falling, but inside Evergreen Haven, something new was growing. 3 months later, Evergreen Haven smells of lemon polish and brewing coffee. Director Roberts rearranged the entire staff schedule, adding 4 caregivers to night shifts. The old yellowed posters warning about understaffing came down, replaced with handwritten notes about upcoming birthdays and hobbies. My clipboard still sits by the door when I arrive, though most violations have stopped. Mrs. December's room now features framed photos of her great-grandchildren instead of the fall risk chart that used to dominate the wall. Some nights I still wake up, my hand moving as if holding a pen, mentally logging timestamps for events that never happened. I have to remind myself to breathe, to let the past go. The nursing station now has a 3-ring binder instead of my old clipboard. Official documentation logs that staff actually fill out. Someone even installed better lighting by the medication cart so night shift caregivers can read labels properly. Write things down immediately, not later. What's one small detail? Maybe a smell, a specific time, a particular phrase that you'd notice right now if you knew you might need to prove something happened 6 months from now. That's the difference between memory and evidence.